Uh, a warm welcome to all the participants for the webinar on Treat Leadership, Treat for Leap, Leadership for New Age Organization. And this webinar is being organized by Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership, Policy and Governance under the aegis of IIM Ranchi. This center has been a center for excellence for quite some time and has been indulged in research related to contributing back to the society, especially related to leadership, policy, and governance issues. And in more details, directors will be introducing about this center. And I extend a warm welcome to today's speaker, Professor Visal Gupta, who is an eminent scholar and a faculty in IIM Ahmedabad. He has authored the book titled as Treat Leadership, First Among Equals, Treat Leadership for Leap in a Knowledge-Based World. He will be talking about his book in detail in today's webinar. And I'm sure that this webinar will be meaningful, thought-provoking, and useful to all the participants. I would further also like to welcome our respected director, Sir Professor Salan Singh, to the webinar. He has been very helpful in guiding us to excel, to make the Center for Excellence, Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center, as successful. And we have been following him religiously. I hope we have come to his expectations. Now, over to Director Sir to introduce the center, and then Professor Hazarika will be coordinating the entire webinar. I request the audience to keep their audio mute so that there won't be any interruption for the speaker as well as the Director Sir's introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Aditya. Let me first welcome the speaker of the day, Professor Vishal Gupta, who has been a great scholar in the area of leadership and management. So, most welcome, Vishal. Let me just introduce Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership, Policy and Governance. You all aware that Jharkhand state came into existence during the stewardship of Honorable late Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. So it was a kind of tribute to the statesman that I am Gachi initiated the Center for Leadership, Policy and Governance. It envisions to become the vibrant knowledge center which takes forward the scholarly conversation in leadership, policy, and governance. It also aspires to establish itself as a think tank, provide professional consultation, advice, and support to government, public sector undertaking, local administration in implementation of their schemes and policies. It intends to develop a pool of leaders, administrators, and managers with a strong focus on policy and governance strategies. The few activities that we have undertaken so far, we have launched summer school. We had launched a series of leadership talks. We have done undertaken few research projects in the area of leadership and policy, particularly energy related and social related projects. And eventually we think to develop a 2-year postgraduate program in the area of public policy and leadership. What we are doing, the center was inaugurated by General V.K. Singh. He gave a very lucid talk on leadership and also connected with the students and social leaders in Ranchi on the aspects of leadership and governance, and also dwell in detail how leaders in social and civilian life differ from armed forces. We also had a discussion with the Honorable Vice President of India, Sri Venkaiah Naidu ji, who also expressed his view and vision on leadership, and thank that Ranchi has taken such a initiative, and such initiative should be taken by various other organizations. Honorable Governor Draupadi Murmu ji has also addressed the center, and there had been multiple leadership talks by luminaries, both from academics and industry. So I will not take a long time and invite Anshuman Hajarika to conduct the proceedings. Thank you and welcome to all once again.
Thank you,
Thank you.
respected director, sir. Good morning to our respected professors, to our respected director, and our speaker for the day, Professor Gupta from IIM Ahmedabad. We are very happy to have you today at the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership Policy and Governance. Just before we begin with the presentation and the ongoing program by Professor Gupta, we'd like to set a few rules of the house so that the program could be conducted smoothly. We will have a presentation by Professor Gupta who will put it up on the screen, and he will share his screen. Professor Gupta will set the rules about the questions and he will convey it to us before the presentation commences. We will request you all to keep your microphones on mute again so that the proceedings could be conducted smoothly. And of course, at the end of the presentation and the lecture by Professor Gupta, we will have a round of questions and a round where you could also put forward your views and discuss about the proceedings of the webinar. Thank you all for attending again, and without further delay, we'd like to request Professor Gupta to please commence with his speech and presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Shalvat Singh, Director I am Rachi, for inviting me to give this talk at the Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership, Public Policy and Corporate Governance. Uh, what I'm going to present today is based on a book that I have recently written. The book is called as First Among Equals, Treat Leadership for Leap in a Knowledge-Based Work. Let me give you a brief background of how this book came about and what are some of the things that I have tried to do, and then I will get the presentation, the detailed part of the ideas I have tried to present. I have my first training was in engineering, and I worked in corporate R&D in the industry for about 3.5 years. And so I had a first-hand experience of people who are working in present-day organizations and essentially indulging in what we call as knowledge work. Knowledge work in the book also I define something as, and it is not a definition that I have given, it is typically defined in management literature as a work where individuals, a work that individuals do for a living, where people, now this is a kind of work where you have to think day in and day out. You have to come up with innovative solutions. You have to come up with new thoughts, new processes, new ideas, and so on. So the argument that I'm trying to make in this book, and I'll repeat it again when I do the presentation, is that in the coming times, the only work that humans would be doing is what we call as knowledge work. And everything else that is going to be there, that would be taken over by machines, and it would be automated. So what will be left by people, left for individuals, is only going to be knowledge work. And therefore, I call this work or these kinds of organizations as new age organizations. New age organizations are going to be those organizations which would have a large component of knowledge work, which people will have to where people will have to think for a living. And all of us, I am Ahmedabad, and a lot of speakers, a lot of attendees are from Ranchi. So educational institutions are a great example of knowledge organizations, because as our job description mentions, we have to think, we have to come up with something new. And my hypothesis in what I'm going to present, my hypothesis is that as our societies become more advanced and technologically developed, there is a large talk these days as to what would be left for humans. And machines will take away our jobs, and well, humans would be left with not much to do. So the point I'm making here is that no humans would actually be left with a lot of things to do, and what humans would do and what machines will not be able to replicate is knowledge work. Knowledge work, and knowledge work is a combination of both innovations as well as service kind of orientation, service work. And the book is on leadership, where I have tried to come up with a new idea of, or a new conceptualization of leadership that would be pertinent for new age organizations, for knowledge organizations. And so the title for my talk, which is actually derived from the title of the book, is Treat for Leap, Leadership for New Age Organizations. I would recommend, as a sort of rule that Professor Hazarika mentioned. Let me just go over the presentation. I would try to keep it short for about 30 odd minutes, and then we can have a free-flowing discussion. And I would like to hear your thoughts on the ideas that I'm trying to present. So let me start uh, by narrating a short story. And in this book, I have narrated various stories and cases, largely coming from the Indian context, and of people who either have who belong to our country, who have come up from our country, or people who are actually currently working in our, or who belong to our country. So I have tried to present these ideas, keeping or sharing examples from our context. And the first example that I want to talk about is the story of Microsoft. Now, Microsoft, as you are all aware, Steve Jobs was the founder. He started this company. We all use Microsoft, I think, Microsoft products, so we know the company very well. What I want to talk about is a leader that sort of was at the helm of this organization for about 14 years, and that is Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer became the CEO in January 13, and he continued as the CEO till February 4th, 2014. Now, he as a leader came into the organization with a very strong mind of his own. And he actually said that Microsoft products should only run on Windows machines. So he looked at other platforms such as Apple, Mac, Linux, and all those platforms as junk. He would call them as junk. He would call them as not really worthy platforms to run their products on. And there was a lot of during these 14 years that he was at the helm of the organization, Microsoft actually went or took a negative turn, and their culture actually became of infighting, because they were actually trying to cut each other's ideas, trying to show that I am doing better than others in my organization, and obviously show himself or herself better in the books of the leader. So at that time, Microsoft was actually a lot of analysts, critics said that, well, the future of Microsoft seems to be very uncertain and not very promising. Now, what happened in 2014 is a new person takes over Microsoft. Satya Nadella, he comes from India. We know about his background. And Satya, when he joined Microsoft, he said, well, I am not here to dictate what has to be done and what should not be done. And he came in with a mindset of empowering people to take decisions about their work. Very contrast, in stark contrast to what Steve Ballmer's thought about leadership was, that I as a leader would dictate what has to be done, and you will have to come to me and take clearances, and then only things can be done in the organization. So here is a new leader who comes with a new set of ground rules for the organization, and he actually starts by distributing copy of the book called as Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. Now, this is a book. It is listed on Amazon, and you can all have a look. But the book essentially talks about two major things. The first thing is the book talks about in big way about empathy, about expressing and communicating feelings, understanding each other's feelings, and trying to be better at not just the task, but can we also understand what are the kind of emotions, what are we feeling about the workplace that we are in. So he said, let us express, communicate feelings, let us try and understand. And the second thing that he said is, let us not judge people. Let us understand the background, the rationale that they are trying to say. So instead of judging, let us try and be more accommodating and more understanding of people. And then he gave them complete freedom that you are the technical people, you are the technical folks working on the ground, you know your customers. So you work on things that you enjoy, that you think can sort of push the boundaries of Microsoft, push the business of Microsoft and so on. And very interestingly, this is a very popular quote that he mentioned. He said, revenue is a lagging indicator. So if we are trying to judge organizations based on how much profits organizations are making, well, that's a bad way of judging organizations. Rather, let us look at usage, let us look at customer satisfaction, how many customers are actually getting attracted to our products. And that is a leading indicator of our organization. So he comes in with a very different mindset. And what happens to Microsoft's story is this. 2000, when Steve Ballmer takes, this is what was happening to Microsoft's stocks. 2000, if you look at the period from 2000 to 2014, there is a big drop in Microsoft's share prices. And after post 2014, if we can look, Microsoft has sort of it's like phoenix rising from the ashes, and it has completely turned the tables, and it has given us, it has surprised almost all analysts in the industry by the performance that it has shown. Now, this is a story that I wanted to start with to talk about how leaders are so important and what is the kind of impact leaders can make in the kind of workplaces that we are working in. We all know we are working in digital times today. The world of business is far more complex and unpredictable than it was few years ago. And the only way businesses today can really succeed is I think I don't need to say that more, is by attracting talent, managing and retaining best talent. So you need to have the best minds working for your organization. NHRD did a survey in 2017 which said that 9 out of 10 companies have been disrupted by technology. There are reports by Google, by different tech companies, say that the technological advancements that our society, that the human society is seeing in last 10 years, 100 years, is actually much more than what the human race has seen in last 20,000 years of our existence. So we are living in a time where you have huge disruptions, huge competitions coming in, and the kind of organizations that we are sort of setting up. Therefore, my claim in the book also is that it is actually very difficult for just one person to be doing everything. So if you think you are Steve Ballmer and you can dictate everything, well, that is a very difficult thing to do given the kind of disruptions that are coming. We know we are working in gig economy, short-term contracts, flexible work arrangements are coming in, and more organizations today are uh, routine work will automatically get taken care of. What would organizations need is emphasis on creativity, lateral thinking, customer service, employees who are motivated to do their own work, and so on. So, as I mentioned earlier as well, almost all growth that we will see in our new age organizations is going to be driven by two kinds of work. One is knowledge work, again, which is going to be creative and coming up with new ideas, or service organizations. And growth in these organizations, actually, there are people who make a claim that the growth in knowledge and service organizations is actually outpacing the number of jobs that are disappearing due to automation. So the point that humans will not be left with any jobs is maybe a very big claim to make. No, we will be useful, we will be needed to do another kind of job, which is service and knowledge work. And obviously, we have in new age organizations, we are going to have new age talents. We have different kinds of generations working together. At least there are going to be four generations that are working in organizations today. You have people born somewhere between 46 and 65, 66, 77, and millennials, and so on. Right? So there is new age talent also that is coming in along with disruptions in technology that leaders are facing. So what I am proposing in the book and in the talk is a new kind of leadership which I call as street leadership, which stands for actually five words: T, R, E, A, and T. Treat leadership. T stands for task orientation. R stands for relation orientation. E stands for empowering. A stands for authenticity of the leader, and the last T stands for team building and ability of the leaders to manage groups of people working together. And what is going to be very important is that today's leadership would need to manage an empowered workforce. So the new age talent that is coming in, it has a very different kind of expectation from the organization. They are not the kind of people who would, if you tell them, if you try and micromanage and tell them everything, they will not be very happy working in those workplaces. So they are the characteristic of people who are educated, characteristic of people who are knowledgeable, is that they like an empowered setting where they are given freedom and they are allowed to take decisions. And therefore, leaders have to manage empowered workforce and provide them with a culture that is participative, open, and collaborative. So the research that I present in the book is based on my work on CSIR laboratories, R&D organizations, and I did two phase study. I did interviews with scientists, and then I did a quantitative survey, and the findings of these studies is what I'm presenting. So the first type or the first element of leadership of this model that I am presenting is what we call as task orientation. And why do I start with task orientation? Why do I keep task orientation right at the beginning rather at the end? Is because I believe that every leader has to eventually get the task done, right? No matter what kind of things that you bring in, no matter what Satya Nadella says at Microsoft about feelings and empowering, at the end of the day, you have to get the task done. And therefore, the first thing that becomes very important for the leader is to ensure that he or she is task oriented, which is essentially getting the work done in an efficient manner. And what do you need to be able to do the task or to get the task done is to be able to set a big picture. You have to give people a vision. That is a very core job of a leader, that you have to clarify what are we here for, what is the goal, what is the long term picture that we are interested in. And then once you clarify the vision, once you clarify what are the roles, responsibilities of people, you have to see if you monitor the progress and see if there are any problems that are there while people are doing their work. So I talk about task orientation as comprising of vision setting, monitoring, problem solving, and buffering. Buffering is a behavior where you as a leader, you have to act as an umbrella and protect your subordinates in case there is any negative politics or power play that is happening at work. So we all know every organization has elements of power and politics, and therefore it is important that you buffer negative impacts of the organization. However, having said that, a leader has to be task oriented, I also mentioned that that task orientation is a necessary, but it is not sufficient condition for ensuring effectiveness. You have to be task oriented, but if you are only task oriented, it may not lead to the success or the effectiveness of the organization. So you've got to complement it with something more. And let me share a very quick short story to talk about the importance of task orientation. Some of you may recognize this person. This person is J.R.D. Tata. He actually, Tatas were the first uh, uh, group in India to start a commercial airlines. They started this in 1932, and Air India actually was Tata Airlines was renamed to Air India. And what is very remarkable about this person, who was the chairman of the Tata Group, is that while he was flying on Air India flights or Tata Airlines flight, he would actually, along with, and he was there on the flight with other passengers, he would wander about in the flights, making notes of tiny details that need to be fixed. There are stories where he would actually um go to the toilet, and there's a very interesting story where he actually cleaned the toilet when he found the toilet of the plane to be dirty. Now this is just a nice example to show that no matter how big or where you are in the organization, your eyes on getting the task done is always very, very sharp. So you have to ensure that you are cognizable of the details, you know the details, you understand the details, and then ensure that people, you are setting examples through your own work and ensuring that the task is getting done. So that is an example that I just wanted to bring up. The second aspect of treat is relation orientation. Relation orientation, as we understand, is about developing strong interpersonal relations. And I actually say that this is built on two-way communication, open, frank, honest, two-way communication, where the leader is actually interested in listening to the concerns of the subordinates. If you can just ensure open two-way communication, I think there is a lot that can be done, because it is only through communication where you can support, you can understand where your people need your support, so you can support them, you can inspire them if there is somebody who's not feeling so well, and you can talk to them about the importance of the work that you are doing, and also giving recognitions to whatever people are achieving at work. Now, this is another example, and this will be related. I will keep referring this back to when I talk about other behavior categories also. So this example, I'm sure many of you would be aware of. This is an example that Abdul Kalam, the late president, used to talk about a lot. Rohini satellite, this was the first Indian-made launch vehicle that was used to send Rohini, which was the satellite, and it was the PSLV that was the launch vehicle. And they were planning the first launch to happen on August 10, 1979. And there were lots of excitement in the public. They had put in years and of effort. And on the day of the launch, on August 10, 1979, Abdul Kalam, just about few seconds before the launch, Abdul Kalam gets a message that we should abort the launch of this vehicle. Now, he consulted his technical colleagues who were there, competent colleagues, and they all said that let us bypass the computer warning. And he did that. He was the project director, and he did that. And about 317 seconds into the launch, the launch vehicle crashed. And it was a big disappointment, and everybody's hopes and expectations just went down. Now, there was press, media outside, and they were wanting to hear from Kalam as to what happened. And so he was very nervous given the excitement, the media, and so on. Now, Professor Satish Dhawan, who was the chairman of ISRO, and he was also there, and he walks up to Kalam and says that, okay, let us go and address the media. And he actually goes and addresses the media and does not allow Professor Dr. Kalam to address. And what does he say? He says, we failed. I have very good trust in my team, and next time we will succeed for sure. So that is what he says, and Kalam does not address the media, and Professor Kalam does. Now, ISRO again tries it, and July 18, 1980, they again make an attempt to launch the vehicle, and this time it was successful. And for the first time, Indian-made vehicle could launch a satellite into orbit. And Professor Satish Dhawan now he congratulates Kalam and Dr. Kalam, and now asks him to conduct the press conference. Now, I have mentioned this incident in the book also, and what is Dr. Kalam's opinion? And he would, in every talk on leadership, he would mention this learning that he had from this incident, that when failure came, the leader took the responsibility, but when success came, the leader happily passed it on to his team and subordinates. Now, it is very interesting that Dr. Kalam himself was a Bharat Ratna. He was a great man himself. But whenever somebody would ask him about leadership, this is the lesson that he would narrate. And he would say that this is the biggest life lesson on leadership that I have learned. And this is so important when we talk about relation orientation. Uh, Relation orientation, the next thing that I talk about, which is empowering, allowing people and giving them the freedom and not to explore, to just experiment, and take decisions that are on the ground and standing by them if they are putting honest and sincere efforts at work. So the next thing that that is there in the treat model is the importance of empowering. I told you earlier also that we are living in a time where it is just humanly impossible for one person to understand and fathom everything. We need people who can become our eyes and ears. We need people to whom we can delegate. We need people whom we can consult. And it is the importance of giving our people that freedom, is the importance of allowing people to take up responsibilities and carry out tasks through which actually leaders are doing themselves also a big favor. Because if you understand, empowering behavior is a behavior where if the leader empowers his or her subordinates, then the leader is actually creating more time for himself or herself. That means because I can delegate, now I don't have to do that work myself. I have some competent subordinate who can do that work. And in the process, I give myself more time and I can use this time to actually use for better, for something maybe more critical, more pressing, something that needs my attention at that time. So I am doing both my subordinate a favor as well as myself a favor by empowering. And it is only individuals who are working on the ground who need to be empowered to take work related decisions. It is also said in the literature that once you empower people and allow them to take decisions, then there is a much better acceptance of those decisions and people are going to likely to implement those decisions as well. The second last thing, or the next thing, the fourth element of the treat is authenticity. Is what is authenticity? Authenticity, and why do I show this person standing in front of the mirror? I say this for two things. Mirror, that means every day when you get up, are you happy about yourself as an individual? Are you proud of standing by your values, doing what is right, and having the courage to do what you think is right over what is easy and fast. So every day when we see in the mirror, see ourselves in the mirror, are we proud of the behaviors that we are exhibiting? And the second reason why mirrors are important is having mirrors are actually also an indication that I can actually see myself better. I am more aware of myself. I'm more self. So authenticity is important where leaders actually set high standards of integrity, that is standing by the morals, the values that they have, courage, taking hard decisions at times. So they have the courage to take strong decisions. They are not goody goody people all the time that they are not weak people. When it comes to taking stands, when it comes to taking strong decisions, they are people who can take those decisions. At the same time, they are humble, they are modest, they are not egoistic people, right? And very important, which is the last thing that I mentioned, is these are people who set examples of hard work before people. They are people who actually show that if I am asking you to work for 10 hours, I am also working 10 hours or maybe more. So they are people who set high standards before their employees. They are people who actually do what they are asking from others and show through examples, they lead by examples. This is again another example that I have given in the book also. This is Mr. Parikar, late Chief Minister of Gujarat, and he was elected multiple times to Goa as the chief minister to Goa Assembly and then as the chief minister of Goa. There is an article that came out on his death. Mr. Ram Madhav actually once visited Mr. Parikar at his chief minister's house in Goa. And so the appointment was for about 8:30, and he reached the residence a little early. And Mr. Parikar was not there. After some time, he saw Mr. Parikar entering the residence, entering the house, driving his own Maruti Zen. So Mr. Madhav actually went and asked Mr. Parikar, what happened? Did you not have a driver who reported on time? And Mr. Parikar's reply was that whenever I have to drop my children or do any personal work, I always drive my Zen car. When I go to the secretariat, that is when I take the CM's vehicle or the government vehicle. And Mr. Parikar goes on to mention that as a leader, his greatest strength, Mr. Parikar's greatest strength was his simplicity, his transparency, and his nature of setting high standards of behaviors rather than just the being a chief minister. So I think people would remember him more for these kinds of behaviors that he set rather than for how many times he occupied chief minister's position. And this picture that I have brought is also a picture where he was just before his few months before his death. He this is where he you can see the oxygen tube attached to his nose, and he went to Goa Assembly, presented the budget. He was fighting cancer, but still he was there. He was working. He was showing that I am here to work. So authenticity is important. And the last thing in the model, the 5-dimensional model that I'm presenting is called as the team building. And I borrow my what I'm reporting here from a work that Google did. They did this study over 2 years. They followed 180 teams, 37,000 employees at Google, and they asked a question: what makes a team perfect? What makes a perfect team? And to them, the answer was if we could just summarize it in 2 words, they called it as psychological safety. And what do they mean by psychological safety? They found two things that were very striking for teams that were successful. The first one they mentioned was in teams that were successful, they saw an element of conversational turn taking, which is members in those teams, in those successful teams, members speak in roughly the same proportion. So that means everybody is able to contribute. You don't see anybody overpowering the team and just one or few people speaking all the time and others are only listening. So they defined this quality as conversational turn taking. And the second thing that they talked about was again going back to what Satya Nadella also mentioned is having social sensitivity, being concerned about how others are feeling, and trying to understand if somebody is feeling uh, uh, left out, somebody is not feeling very comfortable, making efforts to encourage them, and making efforts to ensure that those members are also contributing. And they call this as psychological safety, where people have trust and mutual respect. So the last bit as leaders, what is it that we as leaders of new age organizations, what is important is you see because these are very dynamic situations that we would encounter in new age organizations. So it is very important for the leader to facilitate constructive resolutions of conflict, encourage cooperation, and uh, develop belongingness to the team. So it is important that leaders ensure that there is a safe environment where people can contribute without fearing any repercussions, and they can feel it to be safe when they are participating in teams. So the leaders have to be conscious that if conscious about needs of different people and ensure that everybody is contributing and nobody feels left out as a team member. So this is the five factor model that I am presenting in the book, and I use the name treat because if leaders can think about these behaviors, then subordinates feel that they have been treated well, and such leadership is a treat to watch, and when displayed, is likely to produce great results. So that's the first thing, and also the title I mention it as such leaders who are working in knowledge organizations. They have to have this mindset of first among equals. Why equals? Because knowledge work is something which is a great leveler. That means nobody is big or small in knowledge. You can have young people also giving you very good ideas. So the first thing is let us have this mindset of equals. And then first among equals, it happens that because I am the leader, I am in charge, I am answerable, I am responsible. So while maintaining that mindset of being equal, I am here first. I have to show it through my own work. So I have to be first in demonstrating good behavior, uh, uh, and being authentic. And if there is any repercussions, I should also be the first one to take responsibility if something goes wrong. And that's the idea behind writing this as first among equals, the treat leadership model. Now, I'll just take 2 minutes to go to the next part, and I'll not go deep into that, and maybe I'll just uh, go directly to this slide, where in the book, the other thing that I mentioned is when you have treat leadership, there are the kind of work cultures that get built are are built on or are based on three kinds of values largely. The first value that I talk about is called as a learning value. The second one is called as the enjoyment value. And the third value is autonomy. And I mentioned that if the workplace has these three values, then the fourth aspect of performance would automatically come in. So if you can think about displaying treat leadership, then people will find that the workplace is high on learning and growth. That means leaders we are finding it to be a workplace where I am learning every time, growing every time. And this is very important for knowledge workers. Knowledge workers are a kind of people who are driven by their own pursuit of knowledge rather than. So, if the leaders have to get them to be motivated, they have to show or they have to emphasize that there is learning on the job all the time. The second bit is enjoyment. I find it to be a happy workplace. I find it to be an enjoyable workplace. And the third one is autonomy, which is having freedom to try out things, having freedom to try out different things, start new initiatives, and so on. And if these three are there, then the P will automatically come in, and there would be such leadership can enable leap at work. That means there could be a combination of learning, enjoyment, autonomy, and eventually leading to performance. The problem with leaders, a problem with management, a lot of times is they talk about performance, but they may not be conscious of what is happening on the three aspects. And this is an example that I mentioned in the book again. This is the story of InMobi, our first unicorn, which became profitable to have a market value of $1 billion in 2016. And if you look at the work culture, the kind of practices that they have built in, there is no attendance law in the organization, which is quite common in many organizations today. But what was very striking to me when I read about this organization was they have just one line for their travel policy. So you see, we have all these travel funding and all that in institutes, in our institutes and so on. But their travel policy says only one thing: spend companies' money like it's your own. This is what they talk about as their travel policy. They have 3 months bridge assignments where you can go to another department, take up an assignment, work with the other team, learn something new that you want to do, and so on. If there is somebody who wants to quit in Modi, then they don't close their office space. They actually give their office space for free, their canteens for free for employees who quit to start up. So they actually become like incubators where people can use their office premises in Modi's office premises to think about, to discuss new ideas and come up with something new. And there is 20% time to explore things outside. So this is some of the things that they do in order to sort of promote what I mentioned: learning, enjoyment, and autonomy. And as I mentioned, if these are there, then there is going to be a leap. And then I just mentioned how learning can be emphasized through task orientation, showing by example, leading by example, that is authenticity, and learning through the team. So learning gets impacted through task orientation of the leader, through authenticity, and leading or having teams that are sharing knowledge. Enjoyment through relation orientation, leaders' willingness to talk to the person, again, authenticity, and having good team members who are willing to understand. And autonomy is, anyways, related to empowering behavior exhibited by the leader, which eventually lead to performance and and good performance. So I think, yeah, this is just an explanation of what I presented. Uh, so I will stop here, and this is what I mentioned, what I wanted to talk about: treat for leadership for new age organizations. And to me, these are defining qualities of treat leadership and lead cultures. So I'll stop here. I took more time, but if there are any questions, we can.
Thank you, Professor Gupta, for your insight into the book and your insights into the treat leadership and the leap goals, which leap leadership model which you proposed. We would now like to open the floor for questions, and you're please requested to only switch on your microphone and then ask the question, and Professor Gupta can then take over and answer the question.
My name is Shivashish. I work for IIM Ranchi. Professor Gupta, it was an excellent presentation, and I have seen these things, what you spoke in organizations 20 years back.
Okay.
I used to work in Godrej. I have seen the same things being practiced by Nisha's father, Adi Godrej, by Jamshid Godrej. And a few of my friends who worked in IT industry. There was a great person called Narayan Murthy. Narayan Murthy used to go to youngsters and always said, when he makes a visit, he first goes to the junior most guys and talks to him and tries to learn things from them. As part of your presentation, one thing what I learned in the management school, it was reflecting and all that. The leader, I'm not a person from OBH, I'm a marketing guy. Your leader member exchange theory. I think that's the most important thing to be a successful leader. It was there 20 years back, even today also. If the leader does not have an acceptance, when I say acceptance, acceptance, according to me, is a multidimensional construct. You will have your task performance, as you rightly said, his own ability to learn things. Because what happens if a 20-year-old or 25-year-old person is driving an organization, he has to be latest. So there requires a lot of transformation in himself. And the organization, I mean, if you take companies like Levers, if you take Manwani, he was being asked a question that why didn't you leave Levers? He said that every point of time, when there was a threat in the marketplace, uh, the company ensured that he had trainings at all stages. So I think what you spoke, one thing you can add for your future research is the first of all is the generation of leaders. Because what I find in Godrej as on today, the leaders under which whom I have worked, NISA drives the organization in a very different way. And as you very rightly said about Steve Ballmer, I met Steve Ballmer in Singapore when he came for the Xbox launch. One of my close seniors used to work in Microsoft. His name is Arul Manages. He's a chief architect over there. So I found he's an extremely arrogant guy. He's a marketing guy, and he knew Bill Gates from his college days in Harvard. He was his background. So I was fortunate at a very young age I met very great guys. And from them I learned a lot. I find that your book is extremely practical, I found. The only thing I would suggest you, if you can come up, I appreciate your hard work, your I would say your initiative to come with such kind of book. If you can write another book, I'll be the first reader. I'm telling you because I found very practical things you write. Generation of leaders. You see the same organization, what you have given that heat, how it was 20 years back, how it is being practiced right now. And even sometimes the previous generation, they have some input how to run a business in a different way, as you said, ethics. Ethics is the first thing how to run a business. So if you see companies which have survived as on today, which are going to survive, it's not based on ethics, they survive. And second thing, what I would like you to analyze is that maybe the generation of leaders, as you said, how they are, the same treat how it was during the first generation now. So if you can get some inputs, it will become very enriching.
Sure. Thank you.
And I've learned a lot from your book. I would again like to congratulate you. It's a fantastic piece. It's very practical. And I also in my classes, I believe in talking something practical. And I found what you have documented is all 100% practical. I again congratulate you for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Professor Gupta, would you like to have any comments on what Professor Chakravarti said?
Okay, so I thought it was more of a comment than a question. So, but anyways, I would like to just mention that in the book, actually, I have given more examples of leaders which were of olden times and also of the present day. So, for example, I talk about Satya Nadella as well, but I also talk about J.R.D. Tata. I talk about examples of his interaction with Sudha Murthy, Kalam, and Professor Satish Dhawan. What is very remarkable, so I have tried to sort of get these case studies from different times. What is very remarkable for me, and I have, uh, if any one of you wants to get a peek into leadership, great leadership, there's a book called as Beyond the Last Blue Mountain. So I'm not recommending my book, but actually Beyond the Last Blue Mountain by R.N. Lala on J.R.D. Tata. So it is very remarkable that these qualities uh, were manifested years ago also by people, and they actually showed it through their results that they gave. So they were. Uh, it is not that these. Uh, what I have tried to do is just try and collate and bring it out using these stories. But I definitely agree that even older leaders had these qualities in them which they practiced. So they are. I narrated the incident of Kalam and Professor Satish Dhawan. So they were exhibiting those things at that time also in 1970s and 80s. But the point is, as our society is now progressing, where we are getting into more and more knowledge work, and I think this framework or these ideas would become more important now because you cannot have older ways of managing. Some leaders were exhibiting it at that time, but these qualities are going to be more and more important in the coming. So I agree with you that we can look at how things have evolved, how these qualities have evolved over time. I have done some attempt in this book, but yes, more can be done in the coming days.
Thank you, Professor Gupta. We will take one or two more questions, keeping in mind the paucity of
Yeah.
time.
Yes, yes,
Good afternoon, Professor Gupta.
yes, I'm good.
I congratulate on your book.
Thank
One
you.
of the questions which I have is, so you mentioned about treat and how how work culture helps in getting a performance. But isn't in recent times, because the managers or the leaders have a short-term goals and the focus is predominantly on the first treat to getting work done rather
Yes.
than in terms of creating the work culture environment. Few CEOs are lucky enough to get a work culture where it's easy to transform. But for most, it's more of a task oriented of revenue than the other aspects. So how you see that, and what how young leaders can take this challenge?
See, this dilemma of short term versus long term will always remain. So uh, let me put it this way: that if you want, I would say, uh, if you want to be successful in the long term, then for some time you've got to think about task orientation will always remain, but you've got to think about how do you complement that task orientation with other qualities. Because if you are just focused on tasks, maybe in the short term you may get some result, but what will happen is over time, uh, uh, the organization will just not be effective. So it's like being efficient in the short term, but being ineffective over the long term. So you've got to think about that if you have to be effective, which is a long term thing, you have to set your systems and processes uh, so the story of Satya Nadella is actually very intriguing in the sense that when he took over organization was actually doing very poorly. So he did not come and say, no, no, I want to get results out very soon. But what it be, what sort of became important was he actually said that the first thing that he did to his top management team was give this book of non-violent communication and said, let us start understanding each other rather than fighting with each other. So he actually tried to set the culture right and ensure that people are are thinking uh, are willing to work. If you don't do that, if you don't do that, well, maybe you may get short-term results, but in the long term, situation will not be right. So I think, yeah, it is a problem, but you cannot just be task-oriented. You've got to think about other elements also.
Uh, Thank you, Professor Gupta. We have almost come to the end of our session. We have two small questions which have come up on the chat box. I would just like to request you to please answer them briefly if possible. Uh,
Yes.
uh, since the chat box is available to everyone, I'm not reading it out.
I well, you see, there is a lot of focus on leadership. There are lots of trainings that are happening. So, Navneeta, uh, I think what is becoming important for leaders is to realize, and therefore that mirror of authenticity becomes important. Satya Nadella, I don't know if he underwent any significant training, but I have a firm belief, and this is perhaps an idea for maybe my future work, is that leaders, when they have to, leaders who become good or become great, they actually have some kind of uh, something serious, significant life experiences that they have experienced. So it comes through trainings. Yes, you can do that, but also you have to uh, become more aware of yourself and think proactively of about a lot of these. So yeah, these can be imbibed, these can be done. And Rohit, to your question on leading from behind, well, you see, leaders should lead from behind when things are going very well. Okay, when it comes to so for example, Satish Dhawan led from behind when the launch was successful, but he led from the front when the launch was a failure. So I think that is where, if we can think about leading from the front, especially useful or needed when things are not going right and you have to set things right. And leading from behind is when you let others take credit and uh, give recognition to your people. I think that is where leading from behind is useful and inspiring to a lot of people.
Thank you, Professor Gupta.
Yes.
We are about to end the session since we are running out of time. On behalf of the center, we just have one final question to you, which we would like to know. So, as you have rightly stated on your book, we are going to be knowledge workers in the future. And as we all know, India is a service dependent economy as of now, and a huge part of our GDP depends on services. So, what major changes rather do you see that is needed to be included in Indian organizations so that we are ready for to be a knowledge leader in the future rather than a mere service providing country or a service provider?
So you see, I think that is a very big question because if you have to become knowledge leader, I think we have to overhaul our education system also. But so I think we will have to be more uh, do better in technology. We need to have more skilled, better workforce. As leaders, what you could do is you would need a lot more hand holding of people where you can uh, train them, educate them, and not see your workforce as transactional pieces, but actually see them as something that you can use over long term, and therefore you build those capabilities in the organization. So to answer your question, knowledge as well as service organizations, we need to trust our people a lot more. We need to give them bigger roles, responsibilities, bigger visions. I think that is where it, uh, it would be needed. And obviously, the input has to be improved. Input into these organizations have to be through our education system.
Thank you, Professor Gupta. Thank you, everyone, for attending. I'd like to now pass on the mic to Professor Mishra for the final words and the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Hazarika. Honorable Professor Visal Gupta, respected Director Sir, our most valued faculty colleagues and invited guests. It's my privilege as chair for Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership Policy and Governance to propose a vote of thanks on this occasion. And Professor Gupta, it has been a very fascinating speech. I completely agree with you on your initial comment on the relationship between mankind and machines. We never know tomorrow, along with human resource manager, we may have machine resource manager also. And so far, greed and leap are concerned, people have talked about that, so I will not get into those things. And I appreciate your research. I appreciate the hard work which you have put in to reach to this conclusion. And one very interesting thing, if I see the audience belongs to various age groups. So I thank you all, my young and not so young colleagues. So it's again, if I turn old, so young and not so young colleagues, I'm really thankful to you for attending this particular webinar. It has been very thought-provoking and full of learning. At the end, I, on behalf of Atal Bihari Vajpayee Center for Leadership Policy and Governance, I am Ranchi, and the entire supporting team, and on my own behalf, extend a very hearty vote of thanks to the speaker, Professor Gupta, for gracing your important work and sharing with us your findings and opinions today. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you. And I would just like to mention one thing, that this work, this research work that I have done was under the guidance and supervision of Professor Shailendra Singh. And I am honored that Professor Singh is here and he is listening to this. And I will forever be indebted to him for the guidance that he gave during this and also later. Thank you, sir, so much.
Sir, you are mute, sir. Your audio is not working. Okay.
Congratulations, Visal,
Thank
as
you.
publishing this wonderful book. And we expect to listen, and we expect to have many more wonderful books like this in future. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for
Thank you all. You can disconnect from your.
Thank you for
Yeah, you
attending.
can disconnect. Thank you all.
Thank you.